Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the U.S. faces 5 major security issues at the moment, most of which seem to inevitably point the finger towards Pakistan. Now, let me read out part of his statement here. And I quote, "It's the threat that we've talked about today from China, the nuclear proliferation risk that extends from Pakistan through all those folks who have these weapon systems, places like North Korea, where they can sell these weapons." Now, I think I'm at 5 already, but I could give you a whole list of threats that I think we can effect change on in a way that will really make a difference for the security of the American people. End quote. Now, Pompeo made these statements while speaking to an American radio broadcaster. He blamed Pakistan for providing safe havens to terrorists, adding that no other administration but the current one, referring to, of course, Prime Minister Imran Khan's administration, had taken some action against Pakistan on the issue. He said that he personally took terrorism very seriously because he had lost a lot of friends in the war against terror. Of course, losing friends cannot be easy. But I wonder if he had in mind the over 70,000 Pakistanis we have lost in the war on terror. He also here mentions how Pakistan has been the cause of terrorism in India, claiming terrorists use Pakistani soil as a springboard for their operations across the border. Investigations of which, by the way, continue to point towards India's own rising indigenous movements and terror outfits. But of course, this too seems to have slipped Pompeo's mind. Now, allegations that Pakistan does not do enough continue to spew out from Trump administration, where Trump himself has criticized Pakistan's inadequate role in curbing terrorism within its borders and, as a result, stopping millions already owed to Pakistan in lieu of services provided as an ally to support U.S. military operations. This is where I'm talking about the Coalition Support Fund. Now, Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff, Qamar Javed Bajwa, has made a strong statement earlier also about how Pakistan has done its share, does its share always, and now the world needs to step up its game. Meanwhile, U.S.-Afghanistan peace talks with the Taliban remain to achieve something concrete. The latest round of peace talks ended on March 11th after 16 days of negotiations. The sides reported progress, but no accord on a withdrawal of US-led international forces and the Taliban's counter-extremist assurances was really made. US negotiators also are pressing the insurgents to accept a ceasefire and talks with Afghan society representatives, including government officials. But the Taliban refuses to talk to Ghani's government, which they deride as a US puppet. So what is the U.S. plan in the region, especially considering latest criticism, which is, of course, nothing new on Pakistan for harboring terrorists, not doing enough, etc., etc., while Pakistan remains a key ally in making talks with the Taliban a success? Is there any connection to be made here in supporting its ally, India, especially after the nuclear power's dangerous skirmish with its equally nuclear-able neighbor, Pakistan? So, moving on from there, we will be in our second segment talking about further of what Pompeo has said, but in regards to Iran and Pakistan and Syria. But so far, let me introduce our guest who will be talking to us on this issue at hand. First of all, we have Lieutenant General Amjad Shoaib. He's a defense analyst joining us. And also on the phone, we have Dr. Samar Mubarakmand, Pakistan's leading nuclear scientist. Welcome to both of you to Newswire. Dr. Samar, what is your take on U.S. Secretary of State's latest interview, again pointing the finger of blame at Pakistan for harboring terrorists?
Well, as a matter of fact, this spillover from Afghanistan into Pakistan of terrorists or of Taliban-associated other agents, this is not of our doing. This is because America intervened in Afghanistan and it stayed on in Afghanistan and then it stepped up its operations against the Taliban with the aid of the NATO allies and continued to do so for the last so many years, 10, 15 years, and to no avail, of course. And now they are entering into talks with the Taliban. So all this has happened, but the problem is that we are adjacent neighbors to Afghanistan. We have ethnicity, this common ethnicity between our people living on the border with the Afghan people, and to and fro movements across the border have been going on for the last hundreds of years. They are members of families on both sides. There is trade on both sides. Now, this is just natural, that whatever happens in Afghanistan, and if the Taliban come under some pressure, they tend to move into houses of their relatives into Pakistan temporarily for safety's sake. And when things are more conducive to them, they move back into Afghanistan and continue their operations there.
Dr. Samar, one other thing that, sorry to interrupt you, but one other thing that Pompeo highlights is that as a major security concern to the US is Pakistan's nuclear program. How real is this threat, and how much of this continues to be an eyewash for the general public, the international audience?
This is very strange coming from a leading American leader that Pakistan is being blamed for proliferation. Let me remind the world and let me remind the listeners that initially it was in the West, it was the United States of America which made the first atomic bomb. How come the technology went into the hands of the British, it went to the hands of the French, went into the hands of the South Africans, went into Israel? How come it all happened? Isn't that proliferation? Then America has been crying host about the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which was signed in 1969 and which Pakistan and India are not signatories to. And every small bit and piece of electronics or transistor we ever purchased from the West, they always blamed us for using them in building our atom bombs and violating the NPT. Whereas the Americans signed a nuclear transfer of technology treaty with the Indians, totally in disregard of the NPT. And they did that, and they've been making dollars out of it, and the Indians are in cahoots with the Americans on this, on the nuclear technology advancement within India. Pakistan started its nuclear program 5 or 6 years after the Indians exploded the first atomic bomb in 1974. After they dismembered half the country and broke away into Bangladesh and Pakistan, as you see it now. So when we suffered so much, we were forced into entering our own nuclear program for defense, because that was the only way we could establish a parity with India as far as defense capability is concerned, because on the conventional side we could never really match India, because they had 3-4 times the resources, the manpower, the troops and so on. So this was the only option we had to go nuclear, because India had already gone nuclear and thereby established some sort of a power balance on the subcontinent. And this was, our hands were forced to it. But still, after having demonstrated this through a cold test and developing this capability, we restrained ourselves and did not explode a bomb till India repeated again in 1998 explosion of their own nuclear devices. And then Pakistan responded within 2 weeks. So we have always been pushed into this program by the Indians, because they have always taken the first steps towards it. And Pakistan has to survive on the subcontinent. It has to live with peace and dignity in the subcontinent. And this program has contributed a lot to establishing our dignity and peace in the subcontinent.
And this is coming at a time where the US is seen actively supporting India in building continuing to beef up its nuclear program, whether it's providing reactors or whatever other assistance. Isn't that strange to you?
One of the essential elements of the nuclear transfer of technology treaty was that Indians will expose their existing piles of fissile materials to the American inspectors. They will take stock of it, and then they will monitor them every year to make sure that as a result of the nuclear technology transfer from America, this stockpile of fissile material does not increase, which could be used for making more and more weapons. But the Indians did not allow that inspection to take place, and the program was held in abeyance for a couple of years, and then it started, and now the Americans and Indians are just going ahead, transferring the technology, and the Indians are availing of it, and the Americans are making money out of it. So this is a very unprincipled approach from the USA, that they do not say a word to India about it, what they are doing with it, and they are always criticizing Pakistan, who is we are entrapped in a geopolitical situation. This is why we are facing terrorism, and we are the worst sufferers of terrorism. We have lost 70,000 lives, billions of dollars in economy, and troops also. This is very unjust of the Americans to treat us like this.
Dr. Samar, this, as I was trying to highlight with General here, was that this is clearly more than what meets the eye. This is not about allegations of us being involved in proliferation. This is something more of maybe beefing up their allies, the kind of strategic alliances that are changing in the region. What do you think?
Well, they are, of course, we know that they're working in hand with the Indians and beefing up the alliance. They are upgrading their nuclear facilities. They are also giving them conventional weapons. They are giving them all sorts of technology to build anti-missile systems and so on, and radars. But the point is that Pakistan, on the other hand, has support of none, but only reliance on its own brain power, which is tremendous. And Pakistan has, as you know, totally nullified the Cold Start doctrine, which India put forth about 4 or 5 years ago, in which they raised their conventional 60 armored divisions to punish Pakistan, as they say, wherever they wished. And the answer was that we built the Nasser missile, which is a tactical weapon, which has the smallest nuclear warhead currently in use in the world. And this was all a product of our own scientists and engineers. And this has totally nullified the bogey of Cold Start doctrine, and $60 million, $70 million, the Indians, $80 million they spent on it has gone down the drain. So Pakistan it has to stand on its feet, has to reply back to all these things. But nobody is helping us in this effort. We are all totally on our own.
And meanwhile, what we see is just last week, I believe this agreement was reached between the US and India, where they essentially announced that a proposal for building 6 US nuclear reactors, reactor units, I believe, in India. What does that exactly mean? Are those power related to generate electricity, or what is the nature of these units? Can they be used for other purposes also?
The issue is about a nuclear reactor, a nuclear power plant, is that you can use it for generating electricity. But if a country wants to divert the burnt nuclear fuel into a reprocessing plant and extract plutonium out of their burnt fuel rods, that plutonium can be used for nothing else but making nuclear weapons. So this has an extremely distinct dual use, both for weapons as well as for power generation. And when America is trying to sell nuclear power plants to India, it means that that is an economic deal. They are trying to keep their own power plant manufacturing sector busy and employed, and they want to keep the employment rate at a certain level, and they want to dig into the $160 or $150 billion of reserves which India is normally boasting about, and they want to dig into that, and they want to help their own economy in the USA.
Right.
If we had $200 billion in our pockets, I'm sure the Americans would have signed 10 more agreements with us to sell their own technology and goods to us.
Okay, and here I'd like to welcome another guest who's joining us, the former Foreign Minister Sardar Asif. Welcome to Newswire. As you heard our guest talking about the very nature of US dealings with India when it comes to nuclear reactors or any related issue. And then when the same barometer is not used when it comes to Pakistan, the latest statement by US Secretary of State seems to again restart this cycle of blame. How do you see it, sir?
This is a bit surprising because recently, I think this statement was given by this Secretary of State.
Yes.
Recently, since when the India-Pakistan tension had risen very high, and then the matter got somewhat diffused, he is the one who issued a statement and claimed that he had played a very positive role in diffusing the tension between India and Pakistan. Okay, fine. We didn't say anything to that. And now I think probably what's happened behind the scenes is that the Indians did not find the statements, the reaction of the U.S. officials and President Trump very comforting for their position in this South Asian drama. So just to appease the Indians, and because they are on the verge of selling, I think, 4 or 5 nuclear power reactors, they have made this statement, the Foreign Secretary has made this statement, and put Pakistan in a strange situation, which is that America is threatened by Pakistan because Pakistan is in the nuclear field, is not complying to the regime, international regime, and secondly, it is not, preventing terrorists from leaving Pakistan and causing, damage or something outside their country. So now it's an acquisition. First, it was they were in a position of neutrality, and why they were in the position of neutrality is very obvious. They needed our help in Qatar, where they are talking to the Taliban.
Yes.
So they had to be cautious. Now, since Taliban have shown some reluctance to move forward, they have immediately switched sides, and now they are talking about selling power reactors to India, in spite of the fact that India is not qualified for any such treatment, because India is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or the CTBT. It is not part of the international regime. And our position is very clear. We are prepared to look at all this, provided India first signs. Now, this statement coming from the Secretary of State is obviously and very, in a naked manner, he has exposed the U.S. administration's position, which is that we want to sell nuclear reactors to India, and we will, pander to their.
Do you think that maybe
Mr. Pakistan,
right,
in whatever way India wants? So that's the way I read all this.
You read all this, and Mr. Sardar, if we also think about the connection, the animosity between U.S. and China's continuing progress as it gets more and more countries involved in the Belt and Road Initiative, is this also taking a toll on U.S.-Pakistan relationship now?
Yeah, obviously they've never been happy about the CPAC and the Belt and the Road Initiative, because they have contributed nothing to anybody except selling arms to countries, causing wars everywhere. Because of them, countries have been destroyed, have been sunk into a hole. This is their contribution in the whole of the last century, when they had a total domination of the world. And now, for the first time, somebody is talking about trade and economic relations and sharing benefits of economic growth and economic prosperity with other people and other countries. And for the first time, something is coming to the rest of the world as well, as a result of Chinese initiative and their philosophy of sharing with the world. So they're very unhappy at all this. But we really should just not bother about these threats and these statements and just move ahead on what we are doing.
Right. So here, Dr. Samar, let me ask you again about these nuclear reactors that are now going to be set up in India with the help of the U.S. What kind of security concerns, if any, do they raise for Pakistan and the region largely?
I think that, as I told you before, they have a dual use. The plutonium can be extracted from the burnt fuel. If the reactors are under International Atomic Energy inspection, they will not let them do it. But if they are not under any IAEA inspection, then the Indians can do it, because they do have the reprocessing plant to extract the plutonium out of the burnt fuel. On the other hand, suppose they do that. Suppose they generate a lot of plutonium. I would like to say that Pakistan already is well matched in this context, and Pakistan has a big lead over it. So we are not really worried as far as PU is concerned, and as far as fissile materials are concerned. So we need whatever our requirements are. We know that whatever our needs are, we have catered for them, and we do not go beyond that. We just stay within the ambit of our most necessary defense. And if India wants to pile up its fissile materials, or if the Americans want to earn some money out of it, out of the whole scenario, they are a completely unprincipled nation, as they have demonstrated in signing the nuclear technology treaty with India. Then they can go ahead and do it. But Pakistan
is prepared to address. Right. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've run out for this segment, Dr. Samar and Sardar. Mr. Sardar, thank you for joining us here on Newswire. And with that, we'll take a quick short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire with me, Ayza. And joining us now are two guests. One from Istanbul, we have Tanya Goudsouzian. She's a journalist. And also we will be talking to a political analyst from Kabul, Mariam Wardak. Welcome to Newswire. Both of you are experts in your own right on Afghanistan, and especially at a time where we are seeing 16 days of negotiations come to a pause between the US and the Taliban. Let me come to you, Mariam, first to get your view on how you saw this round of peace talks ending.
Looking at it from a national perspective, I think that there was a lot of negative feelings towards it, withdrawing the American troops and the commitment to the Afghan soil will not be used for any types of attacks on the United States. There's no benefits for the Afghan people. There's a major concern. Obviously, in the recent days, you've noticed that the government has been speaking out against this as well. So, I mean, from the worldly perspective, the international perspective, you can see it as a positive angle. But when you're looking at it from the Afghan perspective, it's nothing that benefits the Afghan people.
Tanya, here, I'd like to ask you also something that Mariam's true. There is a real anxiety on the ground there in Afghanistan, whether it's a government representative or the locals, the civilians, that they see Taliban holding a pretty big important role here in on the negotiating table, which US is sort of almost seen like wooing them. Any kind of future setup where the Taliban could be in power is seen as a threat to all and any progress made in Afghanistan. Is that a correct interpretation? And if so, why? Why is there such a concern about Taliban's rule?
I'm very much in agreement with Mariam. I think these talks have not played out very well in Afghanistan. From the very beginning, they've been flawed. Critics have pointed out the fact that not including the Afghan government in the talks has been a mistake, and it plays right into the Taliban designs to discredit and delegitimize the Afghan government. Now, the recent attacks on Afghan security forces just now in the northwest of the country basically are a testament to the fact that they are trying to show that they're the ones in control. The last province that the attack happened in is not a Pashtun majority province. So, you know, the message they're saying is we are very capable of taking whatever territory we want. One of the major sticking points here for the Afghan government has been that no ceasefire agreement was made before, as a concession before the talks began with the U.S. government. So what does this tell us? Yes, absolutely. The concerns are that we want to turn back the clock, go back to pre-Bonn Afghanistan.
Right. And Mariam, there's something that Tanya said here. It really brings to the forefront the question of U.S.'s role, especially the special envoy here, Zalmay Khalilzad, and how it's seen in Afghanistan. I mean, there was recently a skirmish between the Ghani government's official and Zalmay Khalilzad, where he was essentially told this Afghan official that he is not welcomed in Washington anymore as part of these talks.
Well, the National Security Advisor, Hamdullah Mohib, did speak out, I believe, irresponsibly against the U.S. government official, but his concerns were rightfully there. How they were portrayed could have been altered. However, he was speaking on behalf of the Afghan people. See, the United States, when they had come and entered Afghanistan post 9/11, they didn't consult the Afghan people. And it doesn't seem like they're going to consult the Afghan people after they're going to make the deal with the Taliban. The concern is that the Afghan people understand that the United States is looking out for its own self-interest, but now that they're an ally to the Afghanistan, so they need to look out for Afghan interests as well. And those interests are, one of the concerns that the Afghan people have, are the Taliban dragging their feet? Are they just, what have they demonstrated to uphold on their half? Afghan people, and another concern that they have, the Afghan people, there's not a sense of, there's no fear for the Taliban. I think that everybody wants to live in a peaceful environment. The concerns is, what are they going to go back in time versus moving forward? All of the strides that they have made, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to the females? So these kind of anxiety is bringing, it's bringing a very negative environment, especially with the upcoming elections, what's going to happen. I mean, all of this is just turning into a snowball effect. And I feel like if we don't address it very soon, and if the United States does not come forward and speak to the Afghan people, not more, if you don't want to, and this is not we also have to highlight that this is not an Afghan government-led peace negotiation. This is about the Afghan people. So we need to include the Afghan people. And the Afghan people doesn't mean that you communicate with a certain number of civil societies or people in the cities. It needs to be also a rule-based engagement.
And Tanya, what do you feel about the special envoy's role, Zalmay Khalilzad? He did draw a lot of criticism in the recent past in how, as being a mediator, he should have had a more of an arbitrator's approach, not more of someone who gives ultimatums to the Taliban, whether they agree or they don't agree. So what's your take of his role?
Well, the recent attacks on the special envoy, Zalmay Khalilzad, have been a little bit personal. The fact is, whether or not you like the positions he's taking in the talks, he does represent U.S. policy, and U.S. policy does appear to be disengagement from Afghanistan, and to channel all that anger and resentment on one man is unfair, even if there may be justifiable cause for those attacks.
That's a good point indeed. But also it brings into account whether he has succeeded in taking this conversation in the right direction, because what we're seeing is a spate of attacks where increasingly more and more casualties on Afghan forces are being seen. Mariam, what is your understanding of this increase in violence and it not making its way to the negotiating table as a ceasefire that can be implemented by both sides, especially the Taliban?
Well, it comes to credibility. First, I'd like to make a comment on regards to Zalmay Khalilzad. Zalmay Khalilzad is an Afghan American, so I think that it was a smart decision for President Trump to bring somebody that the Afghan people are familiar with, and somebody who's familiar with Afghanistan and the people, to talk their language, to really understand the essence of what's going on the ground. And the personal attack, was unjustifiable, and I think it was completely unprofessional. However, Khalilzad should also see when the Taliban are about to call bluff. So where is the credibility where they're going to blindly just agree with them? But this is just all assumptions. Maybe they're not going to agree with them. Maybe they're going to be like, no, we don't believe what you're going to say. Show us some sort of confidence building measure for us to believe. Work with the Afghan people. I mean, we are kind of projecting from a negative lens, and I'm projecting from a negative lens because I'm surrounded by nothing but negative views and perspectives. And that should just tell you that the Afghan people would like to hear more from the Americans. The Afghan people would like Khalilzad to really look at their perspective, because Afghanistan has served as an ally to the United States, and the Taliban have not.
That's a good point, definitely. And it also brings into question then whether the Afghan government, the Afghan people are ready for the scenario where U.S. withdraws. Tanya, what would be the framework for that situation? Would the government, whether it's the new one after the presidential elections or it is the incumbent one, would be in a position to take over?
Well, for many people working in the government, with the government, affiliated with the Afghan government, this is an existential crisis right now. It's make or break. Nothing seems to be going in a way where they are satisfied. From the very beginning, they've been left out of the process. From the very beginning, they have said, you can't bring peace to Afghanistan if you do not talk to the elected government of Afghanistan. This is the basic starting point. When you say talk to the Afghans, the Afghan government was the elected body. And the concessions that were made to the Taliban before, by the Americans, before even any real will or good intention was shown by the Taliban, was a flawed way to begin. So you had President Trump declaring that they would withdraw partially before the Taliban had made any statement or gesture. In fact, not only have they not agreed on a ceasefire, but they're waging attacks left, right, and center, and gaining more leverage in the talks. So I know we want to remain optimistic. Everybody wants to come to the country, but there seem to be some serious mistakes being made.
So, Ms. Mariam, just on what Tanya has said here, there is a sense across a large majority of observers almost that feel that U.S. is in a time crunch. It needs to withdraw forces to galvanize its own sort of voters, to support its own voters, because this is something that Trump campaigned on, to remove their people, Americans, from these unnecessary wars. Do you get that sense that they might just be trying to get out faster than they can come to a negotiation here?
Well, we have to focus on Trump. He's a businessman, so he's looking at results-based approaches. So the past 5 years, he's seen nothing when it comes to the Taliban. He's seen soldiers' sacrifices. So I can understand his perspective, but he also needs to understand that when you are an ally, you look at your allies' what their commitment has. And Afghanistan has given so much commitment to the United States. I mean, it's the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces who are dying. We are losing to 30 to 40 people a day that are fighting terrorists that can be a threat to not only Afghanistan, but the region and the United States. The Taliban were the ones who were housing, or what should I say, hosting Osama bin Laden. So again, my question to the United States is, where's the credibility? How are you going to move forward when they haven't given you any type of confidence building measure? Yes, I understand that we had a 3-day ceasefire. The 3-day ceasefire was one of the most peaceful period since I've spent 10 years in Afghanistan, but that doesn't give you enough time to project what the next 30 years are going to be like. Or if the Taliban are going to uphold and say that the soil will not be used against them, who knows what's going to happen? You have to also understand that the Taliban are also fractured. Taliban are not the only insurgent groups in Afghanistan. You're also looking at terrorists such as ISIS that are active here. One other aspect that we have to really look at is what is the message we're giving to the world? These are insurgents. If the Americans make a deal with them, they're going to turn into a resistance groups. So you're giving a boost of morale to the rest of the insurgents around the world.
That's an interesting point, Tanya, that while the Taliban are still recognized internationally by many countries as a terrorist group, here the dynamics are completely changed. They're being recognized as a political entity.
Yes, and Mariam raised another point, that these talks are taking place with the Taliban when there are now many more armed groups operating in the country. What do you do with those? Those guys aren't necessarily party to these talks. They're not going to be necessarily in agreement with whatever deal is reached. So that's an important question to raise as well. Talking to one faction of one armed group, is that really going to bring peace to the country?
And it's really, I'm sorry. We should really look at what the Afghan people want. I understand that the Afghan government is an elected government, but we've had so many Afghans return from neighboring countries. We have to really understand what are the grievances, what is really actually happening on the ground. And peace is something that must happen. I mean, we are losing way too many Afghans on a daily basis. Just President Ghani a few months ago had mentioned that since he's taken office, we've lost 45,000 troops, Afghan National Security Forces troops. And the UN casualty civilian report had mentioned around 30,000, I believe. It's not the accurate number, but 75,000 people in the past 5 years, that's a high number.
And this is again the security forces, of course, on which the government heavily relies on. Thank you so much, Tanya and Mariam, for your valuable insight there. We're going to take a quick short break. We'll be right back with the rest of the show. Welcome back to Newswire. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says Tehran is preparing a lawsuit against U.S. individuals involved with economic sanctions imposed by Washington on the Islamic Republic. Meanwhile, the Iranian and Syrian military chiefs have met on Monday in Damascus, demanding the United States withdraws its troops from Syria. Also, in this meeting, they decided they will use all force necessary to defeat Washington's Kurdish allies by force if they did not submit to the return of state authority. Also present in this meeting was their Iraqi counterpart, whose presence is seen to give a political boost to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and Tehran by announcing the Syrian border would soon be reopened. Now, what does Iraq's presence in these talks indicate? How are these tripartite talks evolving to reflect the changing powers in the region? And how far have they gotten, especially considering the speed at which reconstruction work in Syria that Iran and Iraq both are eager to be part of is going? To find out more, let us talk to our guests here. I'd like to welcome Hadi Gholami, a political analyst, joining us from Tehran. And also from Tehran, we are being joined by Mr. Syed Mohammad Marandi. You are a political analyst also teaching at the University of Tehran. Welcome to Newswire. Let me start with you, Mr. Marandi. If you were to look at these latest developments, especially the meeting of the three military chiefs of Iran, Iraq, and Syria, how would you assess these?
I think that the most important developments that we're seeing is a convergence of interests among countries in the region. And this is something unprecedented in recent history. So for the first time, instead of these different countries acting like separate islands, you see Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, and to a degree, Turkey, working closer together than before. This has economic consequences, it has political consequences, and it has potentially military consequences as well.
Right.
Iraq is emerging from the U.S., the destructive U.S. occupation and years of U.S. sanctions during Saddam, and before that, U.S. support for Saddam Hussein. Turkey, on the other hand, although it continues to have major problems with the Syrian government, there is a general convergence of interests. And this, I think, will make this region much more important in the years to come.
Right. And also, Mr. Hadi, let me get your version on this. Do you see this also as an unprecedented alliance forming within the Middle East, which was never seen before? And if so, then what is it that spurred on this change?
Actually, yeah, I agree with him. The main issue is that before the recent years, we didn't have such convergence of interest between countries like Iran, Turkey, and actually Syria has been a traditional ally, but Iraq has been in the era of Saddam Hussein has been on the opposite side of the geopolitical spectrum than right now. What has brought these countries together right now? First, the Iranian assistance, like the whole front, let's say, against Daesh in Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and the mutual interest of all the countries involved to stabilize the situation. That's mostly what I think has been causing that. And also, there is the issue of that in the recent years, the United States has been, there has been, let's say, bad blood between Turkey and the United States. There has been a rift that has been pushing Turkey, a NATO ally, towards Iran, Syria, and Iraq.
Right. And Mr. Hadi, also on the same note, as US's role has been, as you heard our guests talk about, in funding ISIS and other militias. Now, President Rouhani's recent landmark trip to Iraq is being seen and covered very extensively. How do you see this trip, especially in light of US sanctions on Iran?
President Rouhani's trip to Iraq has been is actually a big political message by the part of mostly the Iraqi authorities to the United States that they are most likely not going to, at least to the degree that they can and are able to, are not going to comply with the sanctions that the US has imposed on Iran. Let's not forget that Iraq depends on a lot when it comes to the economic relations and commercial relations with Iran. And just leaving aside the political part, the economical part is very important here because it's a direct challenge to the US administration's pressure that pressures the Iraqi authorities to actually curb their economical relations with the Iranian counterparts.
So Mr. Marandi, also there is one other school of thought that the trip is being seen as a way of growing their influence in Iraq.
Well, we could look at it from both angles. It's Iraq's growing influence in Iran as well. These are two neighboring countries. They share a border of 1,200 kilometers. It's Iran's most important border. It's the longest border that it has with any of its neighboring countries. It has 15 neighbors, but this is by far the longest border. Mm-hmm. Most of the Iraqi population lives alongside this border from north to south because the west of Iraq is largely desert. Mm-hmm. So Iraqis need a very good economic relationship with Iran in order for their economy to thrive. And for Iran, Iraq is extraordinarily important as well. So both countries benefit from this, and this is something that is the norm in many parts of the world. But the problem is that the United States, which lies many thousands of kilometers away from this region, somehow believes that it has the right to have influence everywhere and to determine the facts on the ground, yet it expects two neighboring countries not to have any form of relationship with one another. Right, because
it's obviously this is what it was probably trying to avoid, for them to come into a strong alliance, whether it's economic or political. But also here, Mr. Hadi, let me ask you this. When Iran says that it will, the Iranian president says basically that he will file a legal case, what does that convey effectively, especially in terms of international law? What does it achieve?
From a practical point of view, this is going to sound pessimistic, but it's not really going to achieve anything on the practical part. But on a political part, yes, it's going to achieve a lot. First, we have to remember that the ICJ, that the complaint will probably go through the ICJ, that actually has authority but doesn't have the power to enforce it. And we have seen before how the US and their allies act when their interests are challenged in the ICJ. They just resort to vetoes, like in the case of, I think it was 1982 to 1986, the case of United States versus Nicaragua, that there were 6 vetoes. But on a political note, it's a very important thing. It shows that the United States is actually not abiding by law, the international law.
Right. And very quickly now, Mr. Marandi, since we've got the last 1 minute left, one of the MOUs that was signed during Rouhani's visit to Baghdad was on the construction of a railway connection that would essentially go all the way to Basra. Now, this is a part of Iran's plan to establish a rail connection, but it is being seen as a big threat by the West and could possibly be the reason of the alarm. Is that true?
Well, this connection is a 25-kilometer piece. If 25 kilometers of railway is a threat to the Western world, then they are indeed very vulnerable. What this 25 kilometers does is that it links the Iranian network to the Iraqi network, and it facilitates exports between the two countries, which are taking place mostly by truck at the moment.
Right, but it's also been defined as part of Tehran's longer-term plan for achieving a more central role in China's Belt and Road Initiative, right?
Well, that is a part of it, but it is also a normal way of expanding ties. And for example, Iranian-Pakistani relations, the more convergence there are economically, politically, the better it is for the region. And obviously, the Americans want to prevent Iran and Pakistan from growing to get closer together, Iran and Iraq growing closer together, Turkey and Iran and Iraq all growing closer together, because the more fragmented the region is, the better equipped the United States and its allies are in establishing or maintaining their hegemony over the region.
All right. Well, that's a very good point indeed. Thank you so much, Mr. Marandi and Mr. Hadi, for your time and your insights here on Newsfire. We could keep the conversation going, but we've run out of time now, and we will be seeing you tomorrow. Till then, goodbye from me.